we had probably the biggest thug in the league, Alyssa Thomas, viciously put that part of the forearm and a fist into Caitlyn Clark's throat. The biggest star in women's sports. Fuck basketball. Women's sports. Excuse my French.
Imagine you are sitting at home on a random Tuesday night, casually flipping through channels, and you stumble across a women's professional basketball game on national television. The arena is packed to absolute capacity. The energy is electric and palpable through the screen. The ratings for this particular broadcast are through the roof. And right there in the middle of all that excitement, in full view of millions of watching eyes across America, a veteran professional athlete deliberately drives a closed fist directly into the exposed throat of the most famous, most marketable, most financially transformative player the sport of women's basketball has ever produced. The referees standing just feet away do absolutely nothing. No whistle, no stoppage, no immediate consequence of any kind. And then, after the league office takes their sweet time reviewing the footage in the comfortable privacy of their boardroom the following day, they come back to the public with their official verdict. Their grand, carefully deliberated response to a brutal, deliberate strike to the throat of their single biggest star on national television. One game. One solitary, utterly meaningless, conveniently low-stakes game served quietly against a struggling team on a forgettable Thursday night when almost nobody is watching. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the WNBA in the year 2024. That is the league that somehow, against all conceivable odds, was handed the most miraculous, unprecedented, once-in-a-generation opportunity in the entire history of women's professional sports. And that is the exact same league that is now, with breathtaking incompetence and almost unbelievable institutional stubbornness, actively, deliberately, and systematically throwing every single bit of that golden opportunity directly into a raging fire. What you're about to read is not a simple story about one bad disciplinary decision. It is not merely a hot take about one controversial play during one basketball game. What this is, at its absolute core, is the complete and total unraveling of a professional sports league that had everything handed to it and is now doing everything humanly possible to destroy it. And the mainstream sports media, including some of the biggest, most respected voices in the entire American sports landscape, has finally and completely had enough. Let us start at the very beginning and be brutally, unflinchingly honest about what actually took place on that court. Because the official WNBA language deliberately and strategically sanitized the reality of the situation in a way that would almost be impressive if it were not so deeply dishonest. During a highly anticipated, nationally televised primetime matchup between the Phoenix Mercury and the Indiana Fever, Alyssa Thomas, a veteran professional basketball player with years of experience playing at the highest level of women's professional sports, made deliberate physical contact with Caitlyn Clark in a manner that went so far beyond the boundaries of basketball that it should have resulted in immediate ejection, a massive fine, and a suspension measured in weeks rather than days. What happened was not an aggressive box out that got slightly out of hand. What happened was not an overly physical defensive play that crossed a line in the heat of a competitive moment. What the raw footage shows, without any ambiguity whatsoever, is a forearm driven violently into Caitlyn Clark's body, followed by a closed fist making direct contact with her throat area, and then a knee that appeared to be deliberately and intentionally placed into her groin. This was a sequence of physically aggressive...
Esiason, former a legendary Cincinnati Bengals quarterback, is a host of Boomer and Geo, a nationally televised radio show out of New York City. It's on CBS Sports Network every morning. He called for Caitlyn Clark to leave the WNBA and go overseas. Dan Patrick slamming the WNBA. Colin Cowherd destroyed them today over the treatment of Caitlyn Clark. The WNBA, Adam Silver, Kathy Engelbert, there's been talk of her leaving. She should be fired. Kathy Engelbert should be...
aggressive actions targeting a vulnerable, unsuspecting player in ways that had absolutely nothing to do with the basketball game being played around them. Millions of people watching at home saw it in real time. Thousands of fans in the arena saw it live. Every single sports commentator, analyst, and journalist who reviewed the footage afterward came to the same obvious conclusion about what they were looking at. This was not a basketball play gone wrong. This was a targeted physical assault on the court disguised thinly under the cover of competitive play. And the professional referees who were paid specifically to be on that court and watch for exactly this kind of dangerous non-basketball conduct, they saw nothing apparently worth blowing a whistle over. Not a flagrant foul, not a technical, not an ejection. Absolutely nothing was called in the moment, leaving Caitlyn Clark to simply absorb the blow and keep playing as if her physical safety on that court was entirely her own personal problem to manage. The league office, to their modest credit, did eventually review the footage after the game concluded. After careful deliberation, they reclassified the play as a flagrant foul 2, which is technically the most severe foul classification in the WNBA rulebook. And in their official public statement, they acknowledged that Thomas had made contact with her fist to the throat area of Indiana Fever guard Caitlyn Clark. But then they used a single, carefully chosen word that tells you absolutely everything you need to know about how seriously this league's leadership actually takes the physical safety of their biggest star. They called it reckless, not intentional, not malicious, not deliberately targeted. Not a calculated act of aggression against a fellow professional athlete. Reckless, as if Alyssa...
With her fist to the throat area of Indiana Fever Caitlyn Clark, it was announced today by the WNBA. The incident for which Thomas was deemed to have committed the non-basketball act occurred at the 6:52 remaining in the second quarter of the Mercury's 111-109 win over the Fever last night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Per WNBA rule, the league office has the option, following its review of any game, to reclassify a flagrant foul or to classify a flagrant any foul not called as such during a game and impose a fine or suspension. Thomas will serve her suspension June 27th when the Mercury visit the Toronto Tempo. It says they have the ability to impose a fine or suspension. It does not say the suspension.
Thomas, a highly experienced veteran professional basketball player, somehow just accidentally and carelessly threw a closed fist into another human being's exposed throat while simultaneously delivering a knee to her groin through some combination of cosmic bad luck and unfortunate physical clumsiness. That linguistic choice was not accidental. That specific word was selected deliberately and strategically by people sitting in a comfortable office who understood perfectly well that calling it intentional would have created a legal and institutional obligation to punish it as the deliberate act of violence that every single honest observer understood it to be. By calling it reckless, they gave themselves maximum political cover while simultaneously insulting the intelligence of every person who watched the footage with their own eyes. And then they handed down the punishment. One game, served on June 27th, Phoenix Mercury visiting the Toronto Tempo, a game with essentially zero national significance, zero playoff implications, and zero mainstream television visibility. One quiet evening off and then right back into the starting lineup as if none of it ever happened. Here is where things get genuinely unprecedented, because the response from the mainstream sports media establishment was not the standard cycle of a couple of hot takes followed by quick forgiveness and moving on to the next story. What happened in the immediate aftermath of that one-game suspension announcement was a full-scale, sustained, multi-platform revolt from some of the most respected and influential voices in American sports journalism and broadcasting. Start with Boomer Esiason, because his reaction perhaps captures the severity of the situation better than almost anything else. This is not some anonymous blogger or a fringe sports commentator operating on the edges of the media landscape. Boomer Esiason is a legendary former NFL quarterback, a Super Bowl participant, and the long-standing host of Boomer and Geo, one of the most widely listened to and deeply respected sports radio programs in the entire country, broadcast on CBS Sports Network and reaching millions of engaged listeners across the nation every single morning. This man, with his enormous platform and carefully cultivated reputation for thoughtful sports commentary, went on the air and told Caitlyn Clark directly and explicitly that she should seriously consider packing her bags and leaving the country to play professional basketball overseas. He was not doing this to be dramatic or to generate cheap controversy. He was doing it because from where he was sitting, with the full picture of the situation laid out in front of him, the honest, logical, rational conclusion was that Caitlyn Clark's physical safety could not be guaranteed in her own league. He also did not shy away from making an observation that a lot of people were privately whispering, but very few with major platforms were willing to say openly. He pointed out that Caitlyn Clark is a straight white basketball player in a league with very different demographics, and that she is simply not being treated with the professional respect she has earned through her extraordinary, unprecedented contributions to the sport. Then consider Colin Cowherd, one of the most powerful and widely watched sports media personalities in America, with a massive daily television audience on FS1 and an enormous radio syndication footprint. Cowherd did not merely criticize the suspension. He dismantled the entire WNBA front office operation piece by piece, calling Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's performance in her role completely and fundamentally incompetent. He pointed out the deeply revealing absurdity of the league releasing a major commemorative poster celebrating 30 years of the WNBA and somehow managing to leave Caitlyn Clark off it entirely. He made the Tiger Woods comparison that resonated across the entire sports media world. He essentially diagnosed the entire dysfunction of the WNBA's relationship with its own biggest star in...
I will say this about Roger Goodell, and he drives me crazy in the National Football League. He drives me nuts. But about 3 years ago, through an arbitrator, Deshaun Watson, with 30 civil lawsuits against him, a quarterback that's with the Cleveland Browns, got a 6-game suspension. Roger Goodell stepped in and suspended him for 17 games. Now, it ended up before an arbiter, but Deshaun Watson, instead of serving a 6-game suspension, he served an 11-game suspension. Adam Silver or Kathy Engelbert should step in here and say, no, we've got to send a clear message across the league. 10 games, 20 games, real, eye-opening, national news-making kind of suspension. They're not going to do it. This league is made up of a...
real time on national television, and millions of people nodded along because what he was saying was undeniably, obviously true. And then there is Dan Patrick, who runs one of the most widely syndicated sports programs in the entire country, reaching audiences across radio and television simultaneously. Patrick tore apart the league's disciplinary decision-making process with the kind of methodical, measured, but devastating critique that carries enormous weight precisely because of his reputation for fairness and balance. When Dan Patrick is publicly questioning your competence as a sports league, you have lost the mainstream media establishment, and you have likely lost them for a long time. The significance of this media response absolutely cannot be overstated. These are not angry fans shouting into the void of social media. These are not partisan commentators with an ideological axe to grind. These are the establishment voices of American sports media, the kind of commentators whose opinions move markets, shape public perception, and influence the decisions of corporate sponsors who write multi-million-dollar checks. When these specific voices are aligned in sustained, vocal, public criticism of a professional sports league's leadership and judgment, it represents a genuine, serious, potentially existential crisis for that organization. Since the sports media establishment has been drawing the comparison repeatedly, it is absolutely worth examining directly and in full detail, because it perfectly illustrates the canyon-wide gap between what serious professional sports leadership looks like and what the WNBA's front office is currently delivering. 3 years ago, Deshaun Watson, the high-profile quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, was facing approximately 30 civil lawsuits alleging serious misconduct. An independent arbitrator reviewed the situation and formally recommended a 6-game suspension. 6 games for 30 civil lawsuits. The math was not exactly inspiring. Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner who is routinely and enthusiastically criticized from multiple directions for a wide variety of decisions, looked at that recommendation and said no. He personally and proactively stepped into the situation, exercised his executive authority, and pushed hard for a dramatically longer suspension. Watson ultimately served an 11-game suspension, nearly double what the independent arbitrator recommended, with substantial financial penalties attached. Now, Goodell had every political incentive in the world to simply accept the arbitrator's recommendation, take the lighter path, and let the controversy fade. The Players Association was pushing back. Watson himself was pushing back. A longer suspension was going to generate controversy and conflict, but Goodell understood something critically important. Sometimes you have to make the unpopular decision, absorb the short-term criticism, and send a message so powerful and unmistakable that it permanently shapes the culture of your league. He understood that his job was not to make everyone comfortable. His job was to protect the integrity and the image of the NFL brand above all else.
They just keep driving into a wall at full speed with Caitlyn Clark. They now have a commemorative poster of 30 years of the WNBA. Caitlyn Clark's not on it. And it's not just like an ode to the veterans that started the league. Paige Beckers and Angel Reese are on it. And Caitlyn Clark's not. You guys, when she broke into the league, you moved her road games to bigger arenas to accommodate the fans. You were flying the last 6 rows of Southwest Airlines until she made such an impact, you pivoted to private jets. And she's not on the 30-year poster. But Paige Beckers and Angel Reese are. What? I mean, recently there were TV games Hers got double the rating of Asia Wilson, the best player in the league, the 3-time champ and the 4-time MVP. Double the rating. This is a paranoid, weird, insular league. And everybody, older golfers were a little annoyed and irritated when young Tiger Woods got all the love and all the coverage. But about, a couple of months later, they went like, hey, wait, the purses have gone up. We're all getting richer. And they
WNBA, meanwhile, looked at footage of a veteran player driving a closed fist into the throat of their most famous and financially valuable athlete, reviewed it carefully and deliberately in the comfort of their offices, and concluded that one game against Toronto was sufficient. The contrast is genuinely staggering. And it explains precisely why the mainstream sports media, including people who are openly critical of Goodell on a regular basis, are now holding him up as an example of leadership competence in comparison to what they are watching the WNBA do. When Roger Goodell becomes your benchmark for getting it right, the bar you failed to clear was not particularly high. The WNBA rulebook, by the way, explicitly and clearly grants the league office the authority to impose fines and suspensions that go far beyond the standard penalty structure. The rules literally say so in plain language. The executives possess the explicit power to look at the context, consider the player's history, evaluate the intent, and factor in the broader impact on player safety across the entire league. They have every tool they need to send a message so powerful that it would reshape behavior across every locker room in the league for years to come. They chose not to use any of those tools. They chose one game against Toronto instead. And that deliberate choice tells you precisely everything you need to know about the priorities of the people currently running this league. If the one-game suspension was the most damaging disciplinary failure, then the 30-year anniversary poster debacle is the single most perfectly encapsulated example of the kind of institutional pettiness and strategic obtuseness that has come to define how the WNBA's front office relates to its own biggest star. The league recently released a major commemorative poster to celebrate 30 years of the WNBA's existence. 30 years of pioneering women's professional basketball, 30 years of building a sport from essentially nothing into a legitimate professional league. A poster meant to represent the past, the present, and the future of the organization's identity and brand. Caitlyn Clark is not on it. Let that sink in for just a moment, because the sheer audacity of that omission is almost difficult to fully process when you look at the numbers. Caitlyn Clark is the player whose arrival in the WNBA forced the league to move her road games to significantly larger arenas, because standard venues were selling out instantly and turning away thousands of fans who desperately wanted to see her play. She's the player whose presence essentially pushed the league to upgrade team travel from commercial flights to private charter jets, because managing her travel logistics and security requirements had become a full-blown national news story. She is the player whose regular season games are consistently drawing more than double the television ratings of A.A. Wilson, herself a 3-time champion and 4-time most valuable player who is widely considered the best pure basketball player in the history of the WNBA. Double the ratings of the greatest player in league history in the regular season. She did not make the 30-year poster, but Paige Bueckers did. Paige Bueckers is an undeniably gifted and exciting basketball player. She is also someone who has not yet played a single professional minute in the WNBA at the time the poster was released. Not 1 minute. She had not signed a contract, attended a training camp, or participated in a single regular season game. She was still a college player at the time of the poster's release, and she made the cut. Angel Reese made the cut too. Angel Reese is a genuine professional athlete having a respectable rookie season. She is a legitimate player, but in terms of moving the needle on national television ratings, merchandise sales, arena attendance, and mainstream media coverage, she is not remotely in the same stratosphere as Caitlyn Clark. Not even close. And yet there she is on the poster, while the player who single-handedly transformed the financial and cultural profile of the entire league is nowhere to be found. Colin Cowherd's Tiger Woods comparison here is so precisely on target that it deserves to be examined closely. When Tiger Woods first arrived on the PGA Tour and immediately became the undisputed singular biggest draw in the entire sport, there was real resentment from some established veteran players. These were men who had spent decades grinding away, building the foundations of professional golf through years of hard work and sacrifice. And suddenly this young, charismatic, dominant talent was walking in and vacuuming up all the headlines, all the endorsement money, and all the mainstream cultural attention. But here is what happened. The overall prize purses started going up. Dramatically, tournaments that used to pay out modest amounts to the winner were suddenly paying out life-changing sums to every player in the field, including the veterans who were quietly resenting Tiger's presence. TV deals got richer. Sponsor money poured in. The rising tide of Tiger's presence lifted every single boat in the harbor, and the veteran players figured that
over the Tiger thing pretty quickly. WNBA can't get over this. And people are very critical of commissioners. I'm not. I think Goodell's A++. I think Rob Manfred's been on a 3-4 year heater, and Adam Silver got $77 billion in the TV deal. Guy's brilliant. But Kathy Engelbert, what are you doing? I mean, you're not heavily promoting her to the Olympics. I mean, you should have been totally outraged for the game. You can't put her on the 30-year poster. The officiating's awful and way too physical. Way too physical. The NBA allows physicality in the finals when the season's at the very end. But they want to keep their players healthy for the regular season and early rounds of the playoffs. Why hurt your content? Adam Silver in the league now. You get to the finals, that's a man's game. Wemby, good luck. WNBA regular season is officiated like UFC. There's no eye gouging, but almost everything else. So, and she didn't have great communications with players, according to players. So last night, Caitlyn Clark, there's a hand to her throat. Nothing's called.
So here's the breakdown of what went down. Alyssa Thomas, in a play that the league office would only much later officially classify as a flagrant foul 2, made contact with her fist to Caitlyn Clark's throat area. But honestly, let's be real here, that is the highly sanitized, PR-friendly version of the story.
If I were Caitlyn Clark, I would seriously consider going to play overseas somewhere and get the royal treatment and get real money.
From the Saudis?
From somewhere. I mean, there's international.
She can't go to the Saudis.
Well, she can't go to the Russians either, as we saw that, Brittany Griner got stuck there.
She did. Well, yeah, in jail.
Right. So
can't take that money from PIF.
But a lot of the women actually do play, in European leagues because they.
Let's be real. If Caitlyn Clark played in Russia and Alyssa Thomas was over there playing like that and she put a fist in her throat, Putin would have her thrown in the gulag. Do you get me? And I'm not kidding you. They wouldn't put up with that shit. Diana Taurasi played in Russia for years.
Supplement their income. But now supposedly their income is going up here. And I know that Caitlyn makes a ton of money off the court in terms of endorsements, and rightfully so. But I think that there's a petty jealousy, and she's a straight white basketball player. And she is not being treated with any sort of respect whatsoever.
Out relatively quickly. Within a season or two, even the most resentful established players had largely made their peace with Tigers' dominance because their bank accounts were growing faster than their grievances. The WNBA cannot seem to make this calculation. The veteran players and the front office alike appear to be so consumed by resentment, by the disruption to their established hierarchy, by whatever complex of emotions that Caitlyn Clark's meteoric arrival has triggered in the institutional culture of the league, that they literally cannot perform the simple arithmetic of recognizing that she is making every single person in that ecosystem richer. They are choosing wounded pride over exploding bank accounts. They are choosing stubborn adherence to a preferred narrative over the kind of unprecedented financial growth that every previous generation of WNBA player could only have dreamed about. And the poster is the perfect symbol of that institutionalized irrationality. It is not a big money decision. It is not a complex disciplinary or legal matter requiring careful deliberation. It is a marketing poster. Someone in the front office looked at a list of players to include on a 30-year anniversary poster, and deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of the absurdity of the decision, chose to include a college player who had never played professionally and a solid rookie over the most famous and financially impactful player in the history of the league. That is not a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. That is a message. And the message it sends is deeply, troublingly revealing about how the institutional culture of the WNBA's front office views Caitlyn Clark's place in their organization. The throat incident and the one-game suspension did not happen in a vacuum. They are the latest and most explosive manifestation of a much broader, much more dangerous systemic problem that has been building throughout the entire season. The officiating in the WNBA has become so consistently inconsistent, so dangerously permissive of physical aggression that goes well beyond the boundaries of basketball, that Colin Cowherd's description of it as closer to UFC than professional basketball is not hyperbole. It is an accurate characterization that anyone who has watched multiple games this season would readily confirm. The NBA, for all of its own officiating controversies over the years, learned a fundamental lesson about player protection decades ago and has built its entire regular season officiating philosophy around it. The principle is straightforward. You protect your stars during the regular season. You blow the whistle, you call the fouls. You establish and enforce a clear standard that prevents the most physically aggressive defenders from weaponizing their bodies against the most valuable offensive players. You keep your marquee athletes healthy and on the court for the long regular season and the crucial early playoff rounds, because healthy marquee athletes generate television ratings, ticket sales, and the kind of mainstream attention that keeps the money flowing. Then, when you get to the finals, when the season is essentially over and the stakes are at their absolute maximum, you can let the physicality escalate somewhat because the context demands it. The players are built for it, and the dramatic intensity actually enhances the product rather than endangering it. The WNBA is currently doing the precise opposite. Regular season games are being officiated as if the standard of acceptable physical contact is essentially whatever does not result in someone being carried off the court. Defensive players are routinely getting away with aggressive contact that would draw immediate flagrant foul calls in the NBA. Contact that goes beyond competitive basketball and ventures into the territory of using physical intimidation as a deliberate tactical weapon. And the specific target of much of this aggression, week after week, game after game, has been Caitlyn Clark. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. And patterns, particularly patterns that result in the most famous player in your league getting hit in the throat during a nationally televised game without a whistle being blown, demand a systemic institutional response that goes far beyond a one-game suspension. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's documented communication problems with the players make this situation even more dangerous and more difficult to address. Multiple high-profile WNBA players have publicly and voluntarily mentioned that the commissioner does not maintain the kind of open, trusting, regular dialogue with the athletes that would give her an accurate ground-level understanding of what is actually happening on the court and in the locker rooms. When you are operating in a communication vacuum, when the players are not giving you honest feedback about the culture of physical intimidation that has been allowed to flourish, you are making enormous decisions about player safety and league discipline based on a fundamentally incomplete and distorted picture of reality. Essentially, Engelbert appears to be governing from a comfortable executive bubble, responding to the sanitized version of events that reaches her desk, rather than the raw, lived reality that the players are experiencing every single night they step onto the court. The result of that institutional disconnect is exactly what we are watching play out. Dangerous physical play goes unchecked at the referee level. The league office reviews footage after the fact and applies inadequate penalties that do nothing to change the underlying culture. And the most famous, most financially valuable player in the league absorbs fist-to-the-throat contact on national television without any meaningful consequence being delivered. The suggestion from boomer Esiason that Caitlyn Clark should seriously consider leaving to play overseas is the kind of statement that would have been absolutely unthinkable even 12 months ago. That a major American sports radio personality would go on the air and genuinely recommend that the biggest star in women's professional sports leave the country for her own physical safety is a measure of just how completely the WNBA has lost the confidence of the mainstream sports media establishment. But is he actually wrong? When you examine the suggestions seriously rather than dismissively, the calculus is troubling. Many established WNBA players already play in European leagues during the off-season to supplement their relatively modest domestic salaries. The international leagues offer better guaranteed money, often more professionally organized team operations, and critically officiating standards that actually enforce the rules and prevent the kind of physical aggression that has been allowed to characterize too many WNBA games this season. Players who have competed in top European leagues have frequently noted that the game is actually cleaner and more consistently officiated, which keeps them healthier and allows them to showcase their skills more effectively. Now there are obvious limitations and complications. Diana Taurasi famously played in Russia for years. The political and safety landscape of international basketball has shifted dramatically in recent years, particularly regarding Russia following the Brittany Griner incident. The Saudi sports investment model that has disrupted golf and soccer has not yet moved into women's basketball in any meaningful way. But Europe has elite women's basketball leagues with serious infrastructure, passionate fan bases, and significant financial resources. The more important point that Esiason was making is not necessarily that Caitlyn Clark should catch the next flight to Spain or France. It is that the situation in the WNBA has become sufficiently unsafe, sufficiently disrespectful, and sufficiently mismanaged that the conversation about leaving is now a legitimate one for rational, well-informed sports observers to have on national radio. The fact that this conversation is happening at all, publicly, on a major CBS sports platform, represents a catastrophic failure of the WNBA's most basic obligation to its most important athlete. Here is the fundamental economic reality that the WNBA's front office seems either unable or unwilling to understand, and it is the most important thing in this entire discussion. The millions of new fans who are buying tickets, tuning into broadcasts, purchasing merchandise, and generating the unprecedented ratings spikes that have characterized this WNBA season are not WNBA fans. Not yet. They are Caitlyn Clark fans who happen to be watching the WNBA because that is currently where she plays. Their loyalty is attached to her as an individual athlete, not to the league as an institution or brand. The WNBA as an organization has not yet earned their sustained loyalty. Caitlyn Clark has. This distinction is absolutely critical because it means the league is currently operating under a profound and dangerous misconception about the source and stability of its own financial windfall. The executives appear to believe that the money and the attention and the ratings are flowing because of the league, because of 30 years of hard work and institution building, because the WNBA brand has finally reached some critical mass of cultural relevance. That is simply not true. The money is flowing because of one player, and that one player is being physically targeted, institutionally marginalized, deliberately excluded from major marketing materials, and protected with laughably inadequate disciplinary responses while the league pats itself on the back for its record-breaking season. The window to convert those Caitlyn Clark fans into genuine, committed, long-term WNBA fans is not infinite. It is in fact quite narrow. Sports fans are loyal to institutions that demonstrate they deserve loyalty. They stick with leagues that protect their favorite players, celebrate their contributions honestly and generously, and demonstrate a clear commitment to putting the best possible product on the floor. They walk away from leagues that seem hostile to the very player they came to watch. Every time the WNBA hands down a one-game suspension for a fist to the throat, they are telling those new fans something important about their priorities. Every time they release a 30-year anniversary poster that excludes Caitlyn Clark while including a player who has never played a professional minute, they are sending a message about how much they value the person those fans came to see. And those fans are paying attention, even if the league office is not paying attention to the fans. The Tiger Woods analogy applies with even more force here because the PGA Tour's veteran players eventually came around once the financial benefits became undeniable. The WNBA may not have that luxury of time. The window is open right now. The attention is here right now. The sponsors are interested right now. The ratings are spiking right now. Every week of institutional mismanagement, every inadequate suspension, every petty exclusion from a marketing poster, every missed whistle on a flagrant foul cost the league real money, real fans, and real long-term credibility that will be extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. The call for Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's removal is not, at this point, merely the frustrated venting of angry fans or YouTube commentators. It is the considered, publicly stated position of some of the most respected mainstream sports media voices in America. Colin Cowherd has said it on national television. The logic behind the call is not rooted in personal animosity. It is rooted in a clear-eyed assessment of her actual track record. Under her direct leadership, the Olympic team selection process became a public relations catastrophe that generated weeks of negative news coverage. The officiating quality across the league has deteriorated rather than improved despite the unprecedented mainstream scrutiny the league is operating under. The marketing decisions, most glaringly the 30-year anniversary poster, reveal a front office that is operating with a complete disconnect from the market realities the league faces. The disciplinary response to the physical targeting of the league's biggest star has been so inadequate that it has prompted major national sports personalities to recommend that she leave the country for her own safety. And the commissioner's documented communication problems with the players suggest she is not getting the honest, ground-level feedback she needs to govern effectively. This is not a performance that warrants continued confidence. This is a performance that, in any other professional sports league operating at this level of financial and cultural significance, would have already resulted in a leadership change. Adam Silver, who oversees the WNBA's operations as part of his broader role as NBA commissioner, has the authority and arguably the responsibility to look at this situation clearly and make a difficult but necessary executive decision. The league is at an inflection point. The choices made in the next months will determine whether this unprecedented boom in women's professional basketball becomes a permanent, sustainable transformation of the sport's cultural and financial landscape, or whether it becomes a cautionary tale about institutional incompetence squandering a miraculous opportunity. Real leadership sometimes requires making the uncomfortable call. It requires absorbing short-term controversy in the service of long-term institutional health. Roger Goodell, whatever his other criticisms, demonstrated that capacity when he doubled down on the Watson suspension rather than taking the easy path. The WNBA desperately, urgently needs that kind of leadership right now. Step back and look at the full picture. A league handed the most transformative, financially impactful, culturally significant player in the history of women's professional basketball. A league that responded to that gift by physically targeting her with impunity, excluding her from major marketing materials, under-promoting her to Olympic selection committees, and handing down a one-game suspension when a veteran player drove a closed fist into her throat on national television. This is the story of an institution so consumed by its own preferred narratives, so defensive of its established internal hierarchies, so resistant to the disruption that genuine transformative talent always brings, that it is willing to burn down its own unprecedented financial success rather than simply and honestly celebrate the player who created it. The mainstream sports media has noticed. Boomer Esiason has noticed. Colin Cowherd has noticed. Dan Patrick has noticed. And perhaps most importantly, the millions of new fans who tuned in specifically to watch Caitlyn Clark are noticing too, even if they do not articulate it in those terms. They are watching a league that does not seem to particularly value the player they came to see. And that observation, made quietly and individually by millions of casual viewers, is the single most dangerous thing that can happen to a league trying to convert a ratings boom into a permanent cultural moment. Caitlyn Clark does not need the WNBA. She has endorsement deals that dwarf her player's salary. She has cultural influence that extends far beyond the basketball court. She has the kind of fan loyalty that transcends any particular league or platform. She could go to Europe. She could step away temporarily. She could, in a more extreme scenario, serve as the founding talent around which an entirely new professional league is built. Her value is not contingent on the WNBA. The WNBA's current value, however, is almost entirely contingent on her continued presence and continued health. The league was handed a miracle. A genuine, unprecedented, once-in-a-generation miracle in the form of a player who brought millions of new fans, billions in new economic value, and the kind of mainstream media attention that women's professional basketball had been trying to generate for 30 years. And instead of protecting that miracle, celebrating it, building around it, and using it as the foundation for sustainable long-term growth, they are doing everything in their institutional power to undermine it. One inadequate suspension at a time. One petty poster omission at a time. One missed whistle at a time. The one-game suspension handed down for Alyssa Thomas' fist-to-the-throat contact with Caitlyn Clark is not just a bad disciplinary decision. It is a symbol of everything that is broken in how this league's leadership relates to its own greatest asset. And if the people currently running the WNBA do not find the wisdom, the courage, and the institutional self-awareness to fundamentally change course, and change course quickly, the history books will record this moment as the point at which women's professional basketball had its greatest ever opportunity handed to it and chose, with remarkable consistency and almost willful determination, to throw it away. The clock is ticking. The fans are watching. And right now, the WNBA is failing every single test.